Windburner Personal, Windburner Duo. Half the time, half the fuel. I literally have a bucket full of stoves, and you know, I've tested them out all over the years. I've tested the Windburner Personal and Duo a few times here also. I also got a little fan and wind meter. This fan puts out, I don't know, 10 to 12 kilometers an hour. The baseline would be the Pocket Rocket Deluxe. This is a stove that, you know, a lot of people are familiar with. I used it this year quite a bit also, and it works well. I've been using the BRS 3000, which I'll show a little bit. I don't think I'll do the full test with the BRS 3000 just because I'll show quickly what it does. But this, I think, is a good reference point. The upright canisters and the Windburner Personal I'll do with half a liter of water, and the Windburner Duo and the larger stoves I'll do with a full liter. To measure the water, I'm just gonna use a Nalgene bottle. So I'll use the half liter Nalgene bottle for half liter water and a full Nalgene 1 liter bottle for 1 liter. I measured it, all right? So when it's flush to the top, it's just over half liter. And if you go to the bottom of the lip, it's right on half a liter. Time to boil, and also the amount of fuel in grams. The Windburner Personal, the main part's the burner. The cookpot has the heat exchanger that clicks in to the burner assembly. When you put that all together with the lid on, got a pretty nice compact setup. Definitely a little bit more tippy when you have it on a 4-ounce can versus the 8-ounce can. But that's the Windburner Personal with its little can base. Same thing with the Windburner Duo. This I used on a couple weeks ago out in the cold. It was pretty good. The Personal I also used out in the cold on that winter video that I posted, well, winter conditions video that I posted a couple weeks ago. And I was pretty impressed. So the two main parts of this are the remote canister burner assembly. So that's got the exact same burner as the Personal. So literally, like I've looked at it in detail. The burner is the same. It looks like the valve or the nozzle is the same. The difference is that you've got obviously a fuel line, and the fuel line and the valve or shut-up, and the shut-off valve looks pretty much identical. Also, this one you have the heat exchanger. It's a 1.8 liter pot for the Duo, and it just sits on there. It doesn't click on or anything like that. So that's the Duo. You obviously have the same kind of story with a cup. I don't know if I'd always bring this or just bring this separately. It does make it quite a bit bulkier, and it's 2 ounces, I think. So this all together is 21.5 ounces, I believe. So the stove, the lid, and the stove, the pot, and the lid, and the bowl, 21.5 ounces, if I remember correctly. And we're boiling. 3 minutes. It was probably less. Maybe I'll be able to see in the footage when that started boiling. So handles definitely get hot. I'll check the footage over. I think I missed when it actually boiled. And in terms of fuel, I typically get, I think it's about 5 grams of fuel burned for half a liter, 446. I must have left that burn for too long. And like it cranks fuel out like literally a rocket. And that's how it gets pretty good boil times. It is powerful. It also means that if you forget about it, you go through quite a bit of fuel. So that's the Pocket Rocket. No wind. Got a bucket here for water. Let's test this one out. I'll be a little bit more vigilant with this one. So the pocket rocket was on for about 3 minutes, and we'll see this one. What I find in general about the Windburners is not that they've got crazy fast boil times. They really sip fuel. They just seem to be more consistent. That's the personal going. Duo weighs in at about 21.5 ounces, and the personal is right on 16. So yeah, the Pocket Rocket Deluxe is 2.9 ounces, and then if I pair that up with my cook set, 7.5 ounces, 7.4 actually. So, all right, your penalty is something like 9 ounces on the Windburner Personal. If you just compare it to something simple like standard upright canister and a cook pot. If you move that down to something like the BRS 3000, BRS 3000 weighs under an ounce, and if you get a really small cook pot, there's definitely lighter cook pots, lighter personal cook pots than the kettle that are a little bit thinner. So, you know, you can get a 6 ounce system. Do you get do you get a huge benefit? I don't know. An ounce is really nothing to speak of, at least from my point of view. But 10 ounces it's some weight. The radiant burner is all warmed up. It's cranking. You might be able to hear it now too. It's really picked up. So that's something else about these. They have a cozy. Now, I've only owned one Jetboil in my life, and it was the Jetboil Sol, which was from a pretty long time ago, over 10 years ago. And it had just one of those standard neoprene cozies. I was never a huge fan of it. It was a pretty thin cozy. This guy's almost ready to go, right at 3 minutes also. Yep, that's a boil. So that's 315. And let's see how much. It's typically getting like 5 grams of fuel for half a liter. Let's see if it's holding steady with that. So 566, 565. So we're at 8 grams. Yeah, the cozies are different on the Windburners. They are, they're not just, they're more of an air gap in versus the neoprene, which is kind of interesting. I'll show it in a second. Yeah, we're hanging out around 10, 12. So that's on the high speed of this fan. It's not the strongest fan in the world. So that's going to be our baseline wind speed. We'll call it 10 to 12 kilometers an hour. You can already see that with a pretty decent breeze, I'm not even sure if this one's going to get boiling, honestly. The flame gets completely pushed sideways. But the Pocket Rocket does a pretty good deal in that it's got a lot of flame, in that it's got, you know, pretty solid output right at the pot. It's really close. It's definitely being blown over sideways. So I might stack things in its favor a little bit and get this over as much as possible. But you can see that, you know, the pedestal, the feet on the stove, it's just those two that are in the direction of the wind that are getting hot. That's going to take a while. But yeah, so this is the pot for the personal and the stove for the personal. So it's not a neoprene cozy. It's this sort of, there's basically an air gap that's created with a plastic structure that's attached to, I think there's a small metal hook in there that secures it all on. So it's solid. It's a good size for a quick trip. It's definitely a great size coffee cup. And then the classic kind of system stove. If you like system stoves, it's probably the kind of thing that you like, that they connect together. You know, you can pick it up, you can move it around. If you're kind of careful, the whole thing's not going to fall over. The issue I had with the Personal was that if you got to melt snow and it's the shoulder season and you need a little bit more of a workhorse, this is just too small. Whereas if you go up to the Duo, you've got some pretty good capacity to melt snow and just not have to sort of pay as much attention to it. With the base also, obviously, you know, the base is low, it's really stable, and the pot, you know, it's not going to fall in there. It's a nice little setup. You know, with this stove here, you're talking about 21 ounces, which is quite a lot. When I break this down, the pot comes in at 13 and a bit ounces. 13 and change, we'll call it, ounces, which is heavy for a pot. But, you know, it's not just a pot. You've got the cozy on there. You leave this at home, you're getting down to 11, which is actually getting pretty reasonable. So I'll tell you guys a little bit of a funny story. So a couple of days ago, I started to do this test, and there was just something not working right. And it turns out what I had done was I had refilled some canisters, some MSR canisters with one of those adapters, and I had just gone to, you know, a local store here and got a big 1 pound can of fuel. And I was like, the Pocket Rocket's just not cranking like it's supposed to. That really like sound of a jet engine just wasn't happening. So I looked at this, and it's not propane. There's no propane in there. It's 100% butane. So we're up at 5 minutes. It might boil. So yeah, I couldn't with the isobutane. I couldn't get half a liter of water to boil on the Pocket Rocket with the fan on. It just wasn't having it. So that kind of messed everything up. I don't think it's fair per se. I think it's good to know that these stoves are pretty heavily affected by that fuel mix. And another funny part of it, another little observation, was that the Windburners were hardly affected at all. They were maybe a little bit slower. I mean, I'm not going to show all that in detail again, but we're coming up on a boil. Yeah, that's a good boil. So 6 minutes and 15 seconds, we'll call it. That's pretty impressive, actually, for the Pocket Rocket to be able to do that. How much fuel did we burn? My guess is double. 420. So that was 25 grams of fuel, almost an ounce. So this is the Pocket Rocket on pure butane. Pretty good today. I don't know. Maybe it was cold out last time I did it. I think it was because it was cold out. Right around 0 maybe. But it was just not having it the other day. I just want to show that. This thing is atrocious. You basically lose half of the flame. I can put my hand over this. I don't even feel it. It's barely even warm here. So I'm not going to even test this. I mean, you saw with the Pocket Rocket. Pocket Rocket took 6 minutes, so double the time from 3. And this one, even worse. I can put my hand here. I don't feel, it's barely warm. 3:15. Same time. Same time as without wind. Exact same amount of time. That's crazy. Fuel, 548, 10 grams. So 10 grams of fuel, with wind, 8 grams without. That's impressive to me, to be able to get that boil time exactly the same with the wind. All right, so this is the question. For the Duo, what is our comparison? I got a couple options. I could either go Dragonfly. This is my first stove. I got this stove in 1999, I think. I don't think it's necessarily the best comparison. Then I have, maybe we'll go WinPro to start. That'll be our reference, because I'm kind of considering the Windburner for it's a bad weather stove. And if I was out in bad weather and I was using a canister, this is typically my go-to system. So the Windburner with the MSR Titan kettle. I pair this stove up with different things. So this is right now the Titan kettle is the big Titan. I think it's called the Big Titan. I think that's my go-to right now. I just like the dimensions. It's really light. 6.9 ounces. So for a 2-liter pot, that's pretty impressive. For a couple of years, I used the 2-liter, just the titanium sort of expedition pot from MSR. That comes in at 8.4 with the gripper. And that's the thing that, it just depends on, it's a personal preference. This is a solid pot. It's got like this sort of classic MSR dimensions. It's seen a lot of use. I used this for years. It's got really nice dimensions. It's a solid performer. The thing is, in the winter, I find it a little bit annoying to always have to have something to grab that pot. You end up dropping this, you're looking for it all the time. So it's still an option for me. I like it, but I really like the fact that you have, using a pot with handles built in. It's a little bit smaller in terms of dimensions sideways, but it's a bit taller. It's got some weird things going on. Like sometimes the lid can kind of go in if you're not careful. But if you are a little bit careful with it, I think it's a pretty solid option. I overheated it by accident with, I'm guessing there was snow in there and no liquid, and it ballooned out. I ended up sort of hammering it back in and getting a good little, it's good enough. This is gonna be I'm gonna use this one for years. So that's one option. And also, real shoulder season. This is a good in-between size pot, the 1.3 by Evernew. So if you don't think you're gonna be melting a ton of snow, but you might have to, this is a good size. If I'm gonna be melting a lot of snow, I like to have that 2-liter. They're pretty similar in terms of weight. Whoa, is that possible? 4.4 ounces, that's really light. So, but this for winter I think is just a solid option. So we'll do it with this. And I'm gonna run it inverted. So you let it heat up for, I don't know, it doesn't take that long. Once that generator is heated up, you flip it, and you're running now in a liquid fuel mode, which is pretty sweet in the winter. So my guess is that this is gonna be something like 6 minutes, give or take. Not sure if I should, to be fair, relatively speaking, just to be fair, give it a wrap. Because if I don't, that the Windburner is just going to kill it. So this gives a little bit more heat directed towards the pot. I guess I could also go, I don't think this will change much for this, but I'll do it next time. So yeah, this is, you know, I talk about this stove all the time. The stove itself, I'll do the weight after and post it and sort of overlay it or whatever. But this stove is super lightweight. You pair it with a good titanium pot and you've got a really lightweight, really good performing stove that if you need to, you know, you can crank it down and simmer. You can run any pot on this stove. You can put frying pans. That's the advantage of the remote, whether it's a remote canister or even a white gas stove, it's just how versatile they are. It's hard to beat. You know, I know that a lot of people, you know, most people use the upright canister stoves, but what you're basically doing is getting like a 4-ounce penalty when you go from the pocket rocket to the remote canister, at least a simple and a pretty lightweight small remote canister stove like this one. And you have a lot of options. I really like this setup. It's hard to, you know, I'm a little bit biased. It's hard for me to look at another stove and go, you know what, I think I'm better off using that versus this one. Same thing goes for something like the Whisperlite. You know, the Whisperlite is a classic, and it's tried and true. I don't see a huge performance benefit between something like the Whisperlite and the Dragonfly. I'll have to see with some wind, but the Whisperlite, it's a good stove. The Wind Pro, great stove. So something, you know, I think is worth mentioning, kind of a disadvantage of the Windburner stoves, they have a pretty low max fill. Like there's a line in there that says max fill, and it's right at 1 liter on the 1.8. So this is a 1.8 liter pot, one notch above 1.4. So this is a 1.8 liter pot, but it says max fill 1 liter. And this one, max fill is 20 ounces, so like 600 mLs. And I think what that's because of, and I had that happened to me once. I was out on a trip with one of my buddies, and he was using a new stove. And it was very similar to, it wasn't a system stove like this, but it had a clip-on lid. And I guess he overfilled it, and when it hit a boil, it was like a volcano of boiling water, and it means that you can't go and grab the pot. So it's pretty dangerous. And I think that's what that max fill is for. So, you know, you become pretty limited just because of using the lid like that. Now, I think it's less of a problem if you just sort of sit the lid on without clipping it down. It's not gonna spew out the same way, but it's just something to keep in mind. The volume is a little bit misleading, but the risk is only when you get up to a boil. So the same thing with the Duo, that, you know, this is almost boiling. 620, 630. Same thing with the Duo is that, you know, you don't want this thing, if you've clipped that lid down, it's gonna get dangerous. Once it starts to boil, you see it just with the steam, it pumps out like a steam engine. So when I use them, I typically don't clip the lid down, especially if I'm melting snow, because you're gonna be putting this on and taking it off. I just sit the lid on there so we hit a boil at 6:55, so let's call it 7 minutes. 18 grams of fuel. That is a huge difference between the Windburner Duo and the Wind Pro. Is you can't run this can upside down. I flipped it upside down by accident the other day when I was out, and the stove does not like that. There's no generator component. So the generator means that obviously the stove is hot, but you need to get the gas you need to get the fuel into a gas phase before it comes out of that nozzle. So typically what the generator is this piece of the fuel line that goes up into the flame. So the fuel comes out in the liquid form, and then it turns into gas here, and then it shoots out of the nozzle in the gas phase. So there's a huge advantage to that, which the Windburner doesn't have. And it's just, if this stove had a generator, and if it could run with inverted canisters, this thing would be a machine, even in winter. Because, you know, all of that heat is from the radiant burner is going into the pot. There's next to no loss. You can get your hands right up here. There's these little vents here, and there's a little bit of heat that comes, there's a bit of heat that comes out of there, but you know, nothing crazy. And you've got the cozy that insulates the whole thing, so you're not losing any heat from the side of the pot either. It's, in terms of sort of setting up and just use, it's a pretty nice experience in that using these aluminum windscreens and stuff like that is a little bit, you know, it gets stale, let's say. So, you know, this one's been around the block a few times, and when you have this foil, the windscreen like this, you get a lot of heat going down, so your stove melts the snow that you're on while you're using it. So then you've got to figure out things like, do you use this little piece of foil as kind of a base? There's a lot of people that build bases for their stoves when they're out in the winter a lot to sort of give you that stable base so that your stove doesn't shift and fall, and it's a pain. This is nice in that you've got everything sort of self-contained. Just take it out, and it's really stable, and you get very little heat going down. Oh, it's cooled off. I really like the Duo and the Duo stove. The Personal, you're kind of limited, and it's heavy for what it is. They've had to add in, I don't know if this grating is essential. It adds a little bit of weight, obviously, and then you've got this big plastic assembly, whereas the remote version of the stove, it's kind of bare bones, and I like that, just to be transparent. I asked MSR for this. I sent them an email and I said, you know, I'd really like to give this stove a try. So they sent it to me, and it worked great. And then I thought, you know, after that one trip, I thought, I'd like to get my hands on the Duo pot, because if you go on the MSR website, there is, oh, we're getting close. There's the Duo pot. So I sent them another email and I said, could you send me the Duo pot? I think that the larger volume would be a pretty good thing to test on this stove. 12 grams of fuel for a liter. That's pretty impressive. You can definitely use the Duo pot, and it's designed, it clicks in. It gets a little bit wobbly. You know, would you be open to trying the Duo pot on the actual system stove? So I said, sure. This one weighs in at 6.9 ounces, and this one weighs in at 8.5, 8.6 ounces. So for a 2-ounce penalty, oh, but generally speaking, you're gonna use this. So 6.9, 7.5. You know, it is pretty tippy without this. So these two parts combined, that's the Personal stove, 7.5 ounces. 1 ounce penalty, and you've got a stove that is way more stable and more versatile. Not only that, is it fits. This stove fits in the Personal cook pot with the 4-ounce can, just like the Personal burner. So honestly, if I was gonna go out and buy this, I think I would buy this stove with the Duo and maybe get a personal on the side if I wanted that small capacity pot, because it packs down really nicely, and it's if you're into system stoves. Like, I want to be clear here that I'm not, out here marketing saying that this is the, go out and buy this stove. I think at the end of the day, it's a real preference thing. Do you like system stoves more than sort of standard classic style stoves? I think this is a great option. I'm less of a system type of stove person, so you kind of got to convince me that the wait is worth it. So that's just being kind of transparent about where I get these stoves, why I get them. I got them to test. I think it's worth seeing how they work in the real world. I'm also starting without the fan on just because it's a royal pain to get it going with. I don't even know if this is gonna boil. Honestly, guys, this is a little too intense for this. I've done the test before in the winter. So this stove and the Whisperlite and the Dragonfly, taking snow, melting it, and bringing 2 liters of water to a full boil, same amount of fuel across. It's nearly neck and neck. It's about 60 grams of fuel to get 2 liters of water boiling from snow out in the cold. And definitely the ambient temperature has an impact. I'm not sure how significant it is. I mean, obviously if it's minus 60, but if you're at like minus 10, I don't know. I filled up a big jug of water and left it out last night. So all the water is basically at the same temperature. It's been sitting here the whole time. This guy's chugging along. 6:55 to boil with no wind. The pocket rocket went from 3 minutes to 6:15. This was 7 minutes, so let's say we double that, it goes to 14 minutes. It should be less affected by wind than the pocket rocket because you have a windshield, and that is definitely gonna help. So, I've got, like, if you put your hand here, you're not feeling much wind at all, down where it's gonna boil. But, oh man, the other day I was so mad. There was just something that was so off about using the butane. It just wasn't having it. It was not working as well as today. So, that's something to, I think we got a boil. We're boiling, yes sir. Got a nice boil. 10:30. I'll mention something about butane and propane after. I think it's worth noting. 10 minutes 30. I'm happy about that. That's actually pretty good. Fuel, my guess is something around an ounce. 278, 26. That's pretty good. 10 minutes total. All right, rolling. And that's the thing about this stove, is that you can line up the vents to be in the direction of the wind, which helps quite a bit. So let's see. Yeah, so here's the thing about these cans. So these are apparently, I don't know the details for sure, but about 30% propane and the rest is butane. So what happens is sometimes, and it depends how much you've used them, but you might go out and it's cold and you say, no, yeah, no problem. I use it with my upright canister and it works great. But that's the first boil, because what you do, if it's cold out and the fuel gets down to below the boiling point of butane, so the boiling point of butane is something around -1 Celsius, and the boiling point of propane, I think, is around -40. So it's got to be really cold for propane not to work. But what happens is, if you're below that -1 and the can gets to below -1, you're going to be burning all the propane first. And then what happens is you're like, okay, no, it's working great, there's no problem. Well, that's because you're using, let's say you've got a 100 gram can, like one of the small cans, the 4 ounce or 100 gram cans, you've got like an ounce of propane in there, and that's gonna burn no problem. And then once that's gone, you're toast. You got butane in there, you're like, this can is full, but it's not working. So that's, I don't know what happened exactly or what the mixtures were that I created, but I added butane to these cans, and they were almost empty, so they're mostly butane. It's fine in the summer, but it's just something to keep in mind. So there's definitely tricks. If you're using a stove like this, you can get it to work when it's cold out. You've just got to make sure that this can stays above that -1. So, you know, there's going to be people out there, they talk about it, they say, you know, before I use it, I put the can in my jacket, or I bring it in my sleeping bag, and then, you know, you insulate it from the ground. So I've heard someone say, you know, putting some kind of neoprene cozy on there also, so that once it's working, it doesn't cool down as fast. They're all true. But it's just a question of, you know, do you want to be doing that? I would rather be able to run this upside down. And that is, honestly, the holy grail. If this system could run a can upside down, that would take a whole redesign. I don't know what it means in terms of, they really control how much fuel is coming out of the can and going to the stove. So it really just sips on fuel. Holy smokes, this is gonna, 4 minutes 20. I feel like it's on the verge of boiling. What was it last time? 5:15? Boiling, 5:10. Five minutes, 10 seconds. I mean, this thing, like, you can even see it there. It's so well protected from the wind. It's impressive. Versus 10 minutes 30 for the Wind Pro with the shield. Probably 264. Same thing, 13 grams, 12 grams, 13 grams. So the other one it's half the amount of fuel. Half the time, half the fuel. Kind of speaks for itself. So that would be my dream, is that if you could get a generator, if they built kind of like a Windburner extreme condition with a piece of pipe that goes up into there and then down, that would be pretty cool. Is it worth trying out the liquid fuel stoves without any wind? Whisperlite versus Dragonfly in wind. Let's see. I'll also do with these the bigger windscreen, just because. Because why not? Because I have it. And for those of you wondering, I have fire extinguishers right there. I'm in my garage. It's not connected to my house. I've got the garage door open, a slit there. The door's open, the window's open. I got lots of air. Starting weight, 397. I don't know, what do you guys think? Is this gonna be faster than the Wind Pro? You know what? I'm gonna use the same windscreen. Is that the same height? Yeah, I think we're gonna do it just to be fair. Something that, you know, people don't always realize is that these things flare up like crazy when you're priming them, especially particularly in the summer when it's hot out. But when your fuel is cool, the flare-ups are way less bad. I love running liquid fuel stoves. It's just me. It's not liking this. That's a fact. I'm gonna start that over. All kinds of surprises. And there's no question about it. Running this guy in the wind is very efficient, very easy. Curious about the Dragonfly. The one stove that I've never really used or have any experience with from MSR is the XGK, which is their expedition level stove. This stove is a classic bell-shaped burner, but you have an on-off valve that goes directly to the burner, which is nice, so you can just shut that off. There's some differences between this stove and the Whisperlite and the Dragonfly that people, I don't know if everyone realizes. One of the things about the Dragonfly stove is that it has a shut-off valve inside the connection between the fuel line and the pump. So there's a little, kind of like a finger that sticks out that it only gets pushed back when you put the fuel line assembly in there. So you can literally unplug this with the stove running, and that valve shuts off, which is pretty impressive. I replaced all of the O-rings on the stove last year, but this is over 20-year-old stove. My question is the fuel line. What's that made of in there? Is that rubber? Will that break down with time? I have no idea. And if you've ever used a bell-shaped burner stove, the one thing that you're gonna know is these things are so loud. I brought this on a summer-long camping trip, climbing trip, years ago in the early 2000s, and after about a week, it drove me crazy. It's like relentless. So I ended up just picking up a, your classic 2-burner propane camping stove because I was car camping basically. Bell-shaped burners, they send the flame up towards the pot like nothing else, especially compared to something like the Whisperlite that kind of sends the flames out sideways. All right, here we go. We're boiling 937, 27 grams. So I'm taking that amount of fuel to prime is kind of being included in the whole weight. No question that just based on the sound, you feel like it's going to take less time. Eight minutes. Impressive. Not entirely surprised that the Dragonfly outperformed the Whisperlite by quite a bit. I'm curious about how much fuel. 8 minutes versus 937, so 23 grams versus 27. I think the output's higher, but because of the direction of the flame, like the sort of the burner configuration, you just get more flame hitting the pot and sort of directed up, less affected by wind. Without a doubt, these things work really well in the wind, without a doubt. Pretty neat to see them side by side versus the Pocket Rocket Deluxe. So that was the Pocket Rocket Deluxe, 13 grams of fuel for half liter of water in 3 minutes, 25 grams of fuel for half a liter of water in 6:15. The Windburner Personal, 8 grams of fuel, 3 minutes 15 seconds for the half liter. 10 grams, 3 minutes 15 with the wind, with the fan on. So 315 versus 615, less than half the fuel, 25 grams versus 10 grams. That's pretty impressive. The Wind Pro, 18 grams, no fan, 26 grams with the fan, 655 versus 1030 in terms of time. That, again, that's for a liter. So, you know, with the smaller windscreen, the Windburner Duo, 12 grams, 5 minutes 15 without the fan on. 13 grams, 5 minutes 10 with the fan on. That's pretty impressive. Then we went to the Whisperlite. Didn't look at those without the fan on, just, I'm assuming it's pretty similar to the Wind Pro. When we look at it all together, 937 for 1 liter boiled with 27 grams. And then the Dragonfly was pretty good, 23 grams, 8 minutes, 4 seconds. It's fast. Dragonfly, it works. Didn't test out the Snow Peak or the BRS 3000. They just don't work well when there's any wind. And they use a fair amount of fuel, very similar to the Pocket Rocket when there's no wind. So, you know, that's 1, 2, 3. How many stoves do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 stoves, 7, 8. Coming up, I do have a liquid fuel stove coming from Fire Maple that they're sending me. Their equivalent, it looks like their equivalent. It's sort of a hybrid between, I don't know, it's a bell-shaped burner. I can't remember the model name, so that's on its way. I'm looking forward to get that. It's very lightweight for a liquid fuel stove. So it's got a bell-shaped burner, but kind of no-frills stove. Looks very compact, very light. That I didn't touch on is and so let me know if this kind of thing interests you guys. You know, I may as well do them sometimes. This is going to be something I'm going to be using next year. So it's Trail Designs Caldera Sidewinder tie-try. Super compact, super lightweight. I think the whole thing together, total weight 5.15 ounces for the whole stove system. That's the stove, the windscreen, the pot, everything. So, you know, let me know if that's something you'd be curious to see in terms of the Caldera style stove with the fan. What can it handle? I've tested it out a little bit. It's very efficient, uses very little fuel, but I have never tried it with the fan on. So, you know, let me know. So that's all I got for today.